Curious little feathered friend, I think we're starting the main house, because this little patch of dirt needs some proper shelter. Blasted place. Everything gets snagged here. Look at this little bunny stuck fast. I suppose I'll have to dig you out, you twitchy little thing. Fog rolls in thick enough to chew on, making everything feel like a giant, damp handkerchief. You know, it reminds me of the grey wool coat I used to wear back home. Remember that night I finally got that fire going? It was like wrestling a grumpy, glowing beast that wouldn't submit to my will. I'd been hauling kindling until my arms felt like they were filled with river stones, and the damp clung to everything, making every match strike a dismal failure. I thought, honestly, that I was going to spend the rest of my days shivering under a pile of wet leaves, just waiting for a miracle that never arrived. Then this tiny spark caught, and it wasn't just heat, it was a sudden, roaring promise against the overwhelming dark. I remember standing there watching those flames dance, painting the wet sand with orange and gold, and it felt like I had unlocked some secret switch in the very bones of this island. The sound of it, that crackling, hungry sound, it drowned out the howling wind and the gnawing panic in my gut. I danced, Wilson. I actually did, practically hopping around like a fool, yelling about making fire like it was the grandest achievement since man learned to walk upright. It was the moment I realized that while the world had taken everything else, I still had the ability to create something warm and beautiful, something that refused to die when everything else around it was soaked through. This blasted earth has the structural integrity of a damp sponge, you know. I swear I'll carve a proper exit through this ridiculous mound of dirt. Blast this stubborn dirt. It's clinging to my boot like it has roots of its own. I swear I'll pry this entire wretched patch of ground apart myself. Last night, in that strange, wet darkness, I dreamt I was back in the city, standing right where the plane hit, the rain washing everything clean. I remember looking down at the watch, the glass fogged over, and thinking how stopped it was, forever stuck on that minute. Then, the scent of salt water mixed with burnt oil filled my nostrils, sharp and acrid. I saw you, just your face on the ball, tilted slightly as if listening to the roar of the water, and it was so vivid, so real. Suddenly, the tide wasn't receding, it was pulling back in a violent curtain, exposing an entire stretch of reef I'd never seen before, and there, caught in the sucking mud, was a crate, miraculously intact, smelling faintly of cinnamon and far-off ports. I reached for it, and when I pulled it free, the wood was etched with symbols that looked like constellations, things that definitely weren't on any shipping manifest. It was a moment of pure, impossible salvage, a whisper of the world I left behind just before the dream dissolved back into the relentless, grey wash of the tide. HMPH, you overgrown mound of earth. You think you can just hold me here? I'll just scrape you loose, you stubborn lump. Should I stack the remaining driftwood into a giant arrow pointing towards the horizon, or is that just wishful thinking? Honestly, this ground is giving me the runaround. I think my souls are filing a formal complaint right now. I'm kicking this wretched patch of dirt until I pop free from this miserable spot. Ever since I first got my hands on those election scrolls, the whole island felt like it was breathing with anticipation. You know, I remember the air that morning, thick and heavy, smelling oddly of wet salt and misplaced authority. The little ceremony was absurd, us standing before the makeshift podium, debating the merits of governance in the face of an unending ocean. Captain Stump, with his dramatic flair and too many polished boots, was practically vibrating with self-importance. Then there was the humming stone, which kept emitting these unsettling little chimes, like tiny, crystalline nervous ticks. When the votes were cast, little tally marks on salvaged bone, the result was a deadlock, a perfect, agonizing stalemate. That whole afternoon dissolved into a confusing argument about procedural amendments until I finally realized the unspoken truth about Stump's veto. It was less a governing power and more a beautifully wrapped cosmic joke that ensured nothing would ever change. Geez, this dirt is more stubborn than a politician's promise. I'm going to dynamite this little wall of earth myself. Seriously, this dirt has the grit of forgotten nutmeg. I'll just power through until I break free of this muddy trap. This whole patch of earth is more immovable than a barnacle on a shipwreck. I'll wrestle you apart until I'm free of your damp embrace. You know, it was the tooth, the really rotten one, the one that just sat there like a tiny, festering boulder in my mouth. I remember the awful, throbbing ache, a dull drumbeat keeping time with the relentless waves. I was staring at that miserable pile of junk washed ashore, picking through bits of wreckage like some kind of demented collector. Then I spotted it, a sliver of metal, curved and cold, from some busted thing, and near it, a chunk of flinty rock. My hands were shaking something fierce, like I'd held onto a live wire for too long. I picked up the rock, and when I brought it against the edge of the blade, the resulting asterisk clink asterisk was surprisingly sharp. The pain, when it finally registered, wasn't a spike, but more like a deep, sickening asterisk pop asterisk, and I actually gagged a little bit. But then, the immediate, shocking void where the ache used to be was almost a relief. I stared at the gap, this little clean space, and I actually laughed, a weird, breathless sound, realizing I'd just performed surgery on myself with scavenged junk. Wilson, even you must have thought that was quite the show, right? Blast this muddy floor, it sticks to my boots like sap. I'm kicking this miserable earth until I finally break free of your wretched grip. Look at that llama, it's grazing over by the palms. Do you think it knows the way back to decent pasture, Wilson? Imagine, friend, this tale from a time before the wreck, when I thought life was just a continuous conveyor belt of destinations. I was heading east, you see, toward a port supposedly filled with spices and people who never looked quite so starved for company. The air that day smelled overwhelmingly of cured leather and distant, sweet tobacco smoke. I remembered a little kid, no older than 10, chasing after some runaway parrot through a bazaar, its feathers a shocking, impossible blue against the muted browns of the market stalls. It was chaos, but a beautiful, organized kind of chaos, like 1,000 spilled jewels. Then, the parrot, this feathered little rogue, swooped down right in front of a massive pile of dyed indigo silks, scattering the vibrant colors like spilled paint. One piece of blue plumage snagged on a vendor's hanging lantern hook, and the moment it did, the entire market seemed to pause. Every haggler and cart puller freezing mid-stride, holding their breath for the bird's next move. It was a tableau vivant, more perfect than any painting I'd ever seen in a display case. And then, just as suddenly, the bird shot up, a streak of cobalt against the pale afternoon sky, and the whole bustling noise rushed back in, louder and more frantic than before. Blast this sticky patch of dirt, it clings like old tar. I swear this island itself is determined to keep me here. Honestly, this compacted grit is behaving like a jealous barnacle. I shall pry this damp muck away with sheer willpower and elbow grease. This damned loam feels like it was poured by a grumpy giant. I'm going to chip through this whole section until I'm standing on solid ground. You know, Wilson, I was remembering back in the old city, before the endless blue swallowed everything. I used to walk through this massive, enclosed courtyard, a place that smelled perpetually of hot bread and spilled wine. The light always caught the dust motes in the air, making them dance like tiny, drunken constellations. I was supposed to be meeting someone there, a contact who promised passage out of this perpetual sunshine. Everything felt scheduled, every corner having a purpose, like a clockwork mechanism ticking